There's a lot of crime that operates under that shadow that we don't pay attention to. There's a rise of femicides. There's a rise of kidnappings against women. And we just tend to slide that under and say, oh, it's this narco state.
So like when I was in law enforcement, there was this phenomenon that happened. I think it started happening during the time that I was active. So I was active from 2004 to 2016. I think that's kind of the region that I was really active in. And I got to witness some of it in Juarez specifically. I think it's the first time I saw that phenomenon where in the killing fields, is what they called it. Some of the ladies that work in the maquiladoras were being abducted, raped, and murdered. Yeah. And it was being reported as, in the media, as cartel related, or as these people were involved in certain aspects.
Shady shit, yeah.
At the start, not when the whole picture came to light, where all these women, this is not that. But you started seeing this phenomenon during that start of the drug war, specifically during the Felipe Calderon administration, where a lot of violence or violent acts were being put under the umbrella of cartel activity. And it was just, it's cartel activity, so...
That means we don't have to really pay attention to it because they also did it to themselves.
Yeah.
We have this very pervasive understanding that, like, if you're involved in it or you get killed in some form or fashion, you were probably responsible for it. And that's also another very...
It's programming. It was programming that has been done to us. When I say us, I mean culturally Mexicans. Yeah. It's a programming that has been going on since the early 2000s, where... You see somebody get abducted and killed, or you see somebody get killed in a violent way, and the immediate doubt comes into your head. He was probably involved in something.
He was shady.
Yeah. And it can't be that. No, maybe he wanted to start a business, and he was getting good at it, and then somebody tried to extort him, and he said no, and he got killed. That's another aspect of it. Or a lady gets picked up, abducted, sexually assaulted, murdered. And then her body gets dumped in a way that is in alignment with how cartel stuff happens. And you can speak to more about numbers than I can right now because you're way more informed in that aspect. But how many murders get solved in Mexico? Back when I was active, the number was like 90% of all murders never get solved in Mexico.
It's still like that. It's still high 90s. I mean, and I see it also with the people that I talk to. I mean, they have completely lost any trust. When I've been covering the madres buscadoras for a while, and they just had a march for Mother's Day in Mexico City.
So Madres Buscadoras, can you explain what that group is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Madres Buscadoras is a collective of volunteers of the relatives of missing persons who basically have taken it upon themselves to go scour deserts looking for human remains.
Because the police doesn't want to do any of that, law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, they're all completely hands-on.
If you wait for them to do it, you'll never find it. You'll never get any answers. So there's groups, there's just collectives that have developed all across Mexico. And, they have made some horrifying discoveries. They have discovered clandestine crematoriums, just machine level of burning bodies in the middle of deserts. A lot of these have been discovered in Sonora and Chihuahua, northern state. Clandestine graves as well, where they just recovered dozens and dozens of bodies.
Now, who are these bodies? Like, who's buried there? Is it all? Are they all cartel members?
Yeah.
Is that how it's presented in the media? But at least that's how I've sometimes seen it presented in the media.
Yeah, it still is. And I think by people, regular citizens observing it too, it's like, we're back to this narrative. Like, oh, well, he probably did some shady shit.
Yeah.
He probably put himself in that position.
Could some of them be, kids that were picked up at a party with other kids?
Absolutely.
That had absolutely nothing to do with it?
Oh, absolutely. I've talked to mothers who are just like, my son was not involved. I can prove it. He was a fucking child.
Yeah.
And kind of just gets swayed into this idea of that. Well, sorry.
Yeah.
I covered a report where this woman had basically found a cadaver, had sent it to the forensic systems for, identification, classification. They returned it in a black trash bag. And, the level of disrespect and,
There's bodies rotting away and stacked in trucks. That's like a common story all throughout Mexico.
Absolutely.
Because they're completely overwhelmed with the amount of dead bodies.
Yeah. We have a forensic crisis. Some forensic labs in Jalisco have completely collapsed. They don't have any more space to put these bodies. A few years ago, there was a kind of, controversy that came out because they had just rented these trailers, refrigerated trailers, because they had run out of space. They stuffed the bodies in there, parked the trailers right outside their facilities, and another one a few areas away. One of the refrigeration systems failed, and it was found out by the citizens, who actually was just like, what the fuck is this smell? And they found it. And, it was something that we would have never known.
Yeah.
Had it not been for this trailer malfunctioning.
Yeah.
And so, this level of, it's just, not even in movies do we see this shit.
Yeah.
It's insane that, so we have these madres buscadoras, the collective, who find the bodies, and then they send the bodies to get processed by the forensics, and then they never see it again.
Yeah.
Because we also don't have databases to collect names, DNA. There's no concise system.
Yeah.
To be able to.
So for people that might not know, law enforcement in Mexico, and the prosecution of a murder is something that the local state government is involved in, unless it happens on their federal jurisdiction. And even when that happens, the federal prosecutor's office is not even close to being prepared to investigate a murder of one person, much less of 100.
Hundreds of thousands.
And some of these institutions, some of these prosecutors' offices basically get changed, renamed, and the leadership gets shuffled around every time there's a new governor.
Yeah.
And people, the cousin of the governor's wife gets the new prosecutor's office. So it's like it's a pardon my French, it's a shit show. And I've lived through that myself, so I can tell that. I talk about that a little bit. But so you see this completely under-equipped, undereducated effort by the government to procure justice for these victims that is just not to be found. Industrial level body disposal happening. People can research El Pozolero. El Pozolero is one of many people out there doing some of these things, probably. So El Pozolero was a guy that basically dissolved the stew maker. He would dissolve bodies in caustic soda. That was his MO. He said he learned it from Mossad agents, which is, I don't know if the story's true or not, but it's a pretty interesting story he told some of the interrogators that got to talk to him. But they don't. Some of these groups don't even make that effort. They just burn the bodies or just bury them now, and that's a sign of. I think you talk about escalation. In Baja, back when the stew maker was arrested, he was actively trying to get rid of the bodies. I don't do that anymore.
No, they don't try. They don't have to.
They don't have to because they're aware that nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to find this body. Nothing's going to happen.
And, we've also seen that they're very brazen about it. They'll just dump dismembered body parts in the middle of, El Centro, in a popular area. And
nothing happens.
No
arrest. Maybe the people involved get caught, but that involved in throwing the bodies out get caught, but they're usually not attached to them.
Yeah. And also what happens with these arrests, because the government trust is so low that we don't even think that, the person that got picked up and arrested or charged for this crime is even the one who did it.
So Demoler is reporting on in your opinion, would you call this a war? Would you call this an insurgency? How would you define what's happening in Mexico? In the first 72 hours of the Ukrainian conflict, Mexico outperformed that war zone that is declared a war zone by international community. Mexico outperformed that war zone in violent deaths. So what do you call Mexico? What do you call what's happening here?
Yeah, it is still very much the upside down. You know, I think that there's localized areas where there is active war going on. You know, the rival cartels are fighting rival cartels, and they're employing tactics that are absolutely used in these battle spaces. You know, it's not any different from these theaters of war that we see plastered all over, you know, the BBC.